There's lots of ways to climb and descend Mount Hood on skis, and I haven't even come close to exploring them all, but let's go ahead and talk about one of them. The White River Canyon is relatively easy to access by Mount Hood National Forest standards and has plenty of varied terrain in it to keep things interesting. The higher you start in the White River Canyon, the funner it gets, and you can make it even better if you start your climb a couple thousand feet higher than the bottom of the canyon. So you'll want to start the climb here at the Timberline Lodge parking area. We left a car at the bottom of White River Canyon and then drove a second vehicle back up to here to Timberline Lodge. That way we had an additional 2,000 feet of elevation to play around with. Before we get too far into this review, this is a good route to ski from early to late spring while there's still snow at the bottom of White River Canyon. So make sure you keep that in mind. This part of the ski tour is pretty straightforward. You follow the climber's track. It's a trail that the groomers at Timberline thoughtfully leave for the climbers to keep them out of the resort area. It's nice to have this pathway already packed down. Not being required to break trail on the way up the mountain makes things 1,000 times easier. One thing that makes things 1,000 times easier for me is if you remember to like and subscribe and then navigate to patreon.com/voiceovertrails and sign up to support acerbic informational content just like this. Now, Mount Hood is kind of deceptive in its own weird way. I guess every mountain is. I won't get too poetic about this because I'm a skier and mountain biker, but not a mountaineer. I don't think like a climber, and if I ever bother to climb this mountain, it'll be incidentally for some other, perhaps more interesting purpose. In any case, especially starting at Timberline Lodge, it's pretty easy to get really high up this mountain relatively quickly, both because the south route isn't nearly as steep as many other mountains and because there's an established pathway. We pushed up about 3,000 feet from the parking lot, and like that was without realizing it. I honestly did not notice that I'd climb. I mean, yes, I noticed the amount of work I was doing, but it didn't feel like I'd done 3,000 feet. Anyway, that brought us within 1,000 feet above the top ski lift. And only then I was starting to realize kind of how thin the air was getting. Because this is actually like, I've climbed Mount St. Helens twice. And this, where we were, it was like 1,000 feet over the summit of Mount St. Helens. Anyway, speaking of Mount St. Helens, I just never quite, like doing this, I did not feel as overexerted as I did climbing up St. Helens because of the steepness. Like the steepness makes a difference. It makes such a huge difference. Mount St. Helens is just like a giant wall and an anthill. It's awful. Anyway, it's gorgeous up here when you get higher up Mount Hood like this. Like also way prettier than anything on Mount St. Helens. But yeah, anyway, this is gorgeous. The cliffs are pretty. I still hate mountaineering. Be that as it may, the views do make it worthwhile. So yeah, someday I'll probably climb Mount Hood. Eventually. Here's a piece of mountaineering knowledge that you might find useful, though, for not ending up as a frozen corpse eternally wedged into a crack in the ice. When you start getting this high up mountains, any mountains, whether you're a mountaineer or not, you do need to think like a mountaineer because mountains are dangerous. Anyway, the top of the White River Canyon is a glacier, and glaciers have these giant cracks in them. And they move around and change shapes. And sometimes those cracks get snow bridges. These cracks are crevasses. We like crevasse. Sounds so grand. Anyway, these crevasses often get snow bridges over them. So you can't, it's where the snow bridges over that crack and then you don't see it. And then here in the springtime, that's when those snow bridges start to melt away and they can just crumble underneath your skis. So you need to really watch the surface of that glacier very, very closely and look for cracks in the snow. I peered into this one and it just kind of goes forever. There's no bottom to it. So don't mess around with these and make sure you don't ski like down into one. Choose where you drop in very, very carefully when you get this high up the mountain. And I do mean to scare you. You can die if you do this wrong, so please take this seriously. Also, don't forget to check avalanche conditions at nwac.us before you leave the house and consider making a donation to the avalanche forecasts. Somewhere at around 9,200 feet of elevation, there's this little shelf where I think I remember having set up a tent about 20 years ago, the last time I lost control of my life and ended up spending the night camping in the snow on the side of a mountain. Seriously, I don't do that unless there's extenuating circumstances. And fortunately, there are not very many extenuating circumstances that need to lead to you camping in a tent on the side of a mountain in a snowstorm. But I've done it. Anyhow, this is a great spot to make a transition and then push off. Just make sure that, once again, you're watching out for all the cracks in the ice below. Make sure you've been able to verify the safety of the path that you've chosen before you drop in. There isn't as much for me to say about ski descents as there is for mountain bike descents. This is a really fun pitch to ski down, though. It's a lot more than one pitch. It's 5,000 feet, so to call it one pitch is it's not quite fair. An important note about volcano skiing is that this is generally a springtime pursuit, especially Pacific Northwest volcanoes, because they're just sticking up in the air next to the Pacific Ocean. So it's just pretty much always white out. Anyhow, you should be aiming to do this when the snow is going to warm up to nice corn in the afternoon. Unfortunately, powder days are almost always also avalanche days around here because the snowstorms drop so much snow, and visibility can be very limited on those days anyway, so it can be impossible to even know where you are on the mountain. But days like this one, where there's a relatively stable base underneath a few inches of sun-warmed top layer, are absolutely amazing on the south side of Mount Hood. Stay to the skiers right of the canyon for about the first 500 or so feet of descent from that 9,200-foot shelf, and that should get you below most of the mobile part of the White River Glacier, the part that's actively calving and cracking. Once we were out of the crevasse zone, we traversed into the middle of the canyon. I was having an absolute blast in here. This kind of skiing, this is the good stuff. This is what we come down here for. This place is just plain magical, and it's worth every bit of pain to get to it. On an effort to fun ratio, this blows anything on Mount St. Helens clean out of the water. The approach is less steep. It can be shuttled if you want to. The roads are consistently plowed, and there's plenty of places to stop for a burger and a beer après ski. Back to the skiing experience, though, it's just turns for days for at least a couple thousand feet of descent in here, but the canyon walls do start to close in as you descend, and then you get to make some choices about which way to descend as the canyon gets split up into multiple different courses. This is where our previous experience climbing up this canyon from the bottom came in handy. The easiest way down, the one that didn't require putting our skins back on for more climbing, was to ski down the middle valley. You can pick whichever way you want, just know that if you choose wrong, you'll end up putting your skins back on for some climbing in the middle of your descent. If you like that, that's great. If you don't, then choose wisely. I really can't overstate the awesomeness of this descent. You're just not going to get anything quite like this in a resort, especially that's this untracked. We were following one set of tracks. The only other set of tracks that was in here was just us, one other group. Anyway, there's a lot of variation in the terrain, especially in the fat middle section of this where the canyon is eroded into all kinds of fun little shapes that give you some nice pitches to explore. I hope you're not too particular about how pristine your ski bases are, because there are a lot of rocks hiding just under the surface, since this whole area deals with a lot of wind that moves the snow around, and in the springtime the areas that are worn thin by that wind kind of start to melt away, and there's no groomers showing up to pile snow back into places where they know people are going to run into rocks and dirt. You're on your own in here. There are some tight spots that we encountered. That's part of the fun of skiing backcountry, figuring out ways around things that aren't just set up and groomed all nice for you, but if you're cautious like I am, then you'll be just fine. Another word to the wise is if you get to this point in the canyon, traverse as high up the slopes as possible. Just stay up, stay up, stay up. You'll thank me later if you follow this advice, because you're going to need the additional elevation later to get your speed up. Also, keep in mind, avalanches are a present danger in here. This is avalanche debris. In this video, you're seeing me ski across avalanche debris. I also had to stop a few times, by the way, unrelated to the avalanche debris. I had to stop quite a few times on this ascent just to give my quads a rest. I was it's so long. 5,000 feet of descending, even though that's the easy part on skis, my quads are just burning. This was, after all, quite a bit of descent. It's just a lot of descending. From this top spot, though, here, where I told you to kind of stay high on the traverse, use that additional elevation that you saved to keep your speed up so that you can make it to the top of this hill on the other side of the snow bridge across the creek. It's not a creek, it's the White River, right? Across the White River without needing to herringbone or snow skate. From here, just commute out of the canyon like normal. You can sort of just coast out of here without too much incident. That's it. You're done. You just coast out. Try not to mow over any sledders or snowshoers. Why do people snowshoe? Why? Why do you go snowshoeing? I don't get it. I don't understand. It's awful. Anyhow, I'd like to take this moment to thank all my Patreon supporters, especially my Loamy Goodness sponsors, Andy Suri, Brad Goodson, and Charles Kim. I'd also like to thank my Hero Dirt level sponsors earning their special mention at the end of this video: Brian Fix, Bryce Ulrich, Devin Young, Edward Lanton, and Pedro Cantorini. If you'd like to join this white river of sponsors helping me defray the costs of creating this content, navigate to patreon.com/voiceovertrails and choose a sponsorship level that makes sense for the value or entertainment or whatever it is you get out of this channel. Now, get out there and go shred some POW or spring corn, whatever it is you like to shred. I don't know. Go shred in the woods. Enjoy yourself. Go shred some POW.